Hi, I'm Josue Santana. Happy to be providing a Lenten Devotional today. I'm going to be going and reading from Luke chapter 10, verses 25 through 37. I'm going to be discussing this idea of being a neighbor, or what is a neighbor. So I'm just going to read this first, and I'll give you my thoughts. Um, on one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "What is written in the law?" he replied. "How do you read it?" He answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." "You've answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this, and you will live." But he wanted to justify himself. So he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" In reply, Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he fell into the hands of robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, took him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper. 'Look after him,' he said, 'and when I return I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have.' Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers?" The expert in the law replied, "The one who had mercy on him." Jesus told him, "Go and do likewise." This passage stood out to me because recent events, a lot of people have been kind of discussing this idea of neighbor and what it means to be a neighbor, what is the expectation, how we treat one another, things like that. And when we read this passage, there's a lot here that I think is just kind of lost, just through time and understanding. Maybe many of you, all of you, know that the relationship between Jews and Samaritans wasn't exactly great. But there's also this idea that these priests, these Levites, have a higher calling. These are the quote unquote the best of the best, in some way, on how to act towards one another, to their fellow human. And I think it's easy to look at situations and act like you know what you should do, but in practice, it's really, really hard to know what to do. And so we have this lawyer, this legal person who knows how to read things in a way. And I like to play games, and I like to figure out how to angle shoot, how to use the rules to do funny things, crazy things, win, whatever. And we see this individual want to elevate themselves without being able to, or without needing to do more than they have to. They just want to be able to justify their things. Well, you know, my neighbor could potentially just be literally the person next door, maybe the people across the street, but maybe Jesus can justify it so I don't have to deal with that person who's just catty corner from me. And that's where we're seeing a lot lately is justifying who is and isn't our neighbor. And we see here that there isn't a geographic fence here. I mean, obviously there are regions these people hail from, but we're talking about a situation where one walks by another, already breaking down this idea of who is our neighbor in a situation that we're not talking about home or community or anything of the sort, beyond just general societal expectations. A Samaritan, a Levite, a priest, someone who's been robbed, a Jew. All of these things are the most we know about any of these characters in this parable. And that's really it. And it's just to emphasize that our neighbor is just someone who is hurting, someone who has just been robbed or is of need. And even what is called from us exceeds that. This person did a lot for this person who's been robbed, to bandage them, heal them, give them wine and oil, take them to an inn, cover their costs, say, hey, I'll be back in a few days and I'll reimburse you even more. That's so much. It's so extra. I don't know if I could necessarily go that far. But this is the calling that Jesus did, and this is the challenge that he presented to him. And so now we live in this time where I interact with a lot of people online. I'm sending this message to a person I may have never met in person. Um, who is our neighbor becomes harder and harder to kind of reconcile when I know so much more about a lot of you versus literally my neighbor. Um, and it's easier to communicate through text and phone and video calls and everything of that sort. I have coworkers driving in an hour from to work, and are they still my neighbor? And we kind of understand it. We look at who is immediately around us and say those are our neighbors. But the call really is that what is a neighbor is just a person that we are able to help. We walk by and we see, hey, I can directly impact you. You are hurting or you are in need, and I can provide aid. And I think that's a huge thing that we just kind of overlook, or we spend too much time trying to define who is our neighbor. When our neighbor, clearly written here, is anyone who is in need. Um, it's easy to get lost in definitions. I do it all the time. I used to do it a lot for work. Um, but being able to simply say, I see you and I want to help you, is what I come away reading from this passage. This person who, in a lot of ways, can be like me, just trying to say, well, Jesus, who is my neighbor? What do I really have to do? What's the angle so I can do the bare minimum to get the maximum value back? Uh, and Jesus said, the bare minimum is doing everything you can to a person you don't even know. And that is what it means to be a neighbor. That is defining who your neighbor is. And so I see this passage and I see this beautiful kind of idea presented by Jesus, again, in that context of trying to angle shoot and just ask the right questions so that I can feel good about myself. And I think oftentimes we see people just wanting to feel good about themselves more than wanting to be a good neighbor. And it's a hard thing to reconcile. I want to do that. I think we all want to do that. And the challenge is being able to read a passage like this, to hear Jesus's words and say, there is a higher calling for me. There is a higher expectation for me, not because I am a Christian, not because I am a Jew or a Samaritan or anything of the sort, but because I'm compelled to love those around me in a way that is transformative. And I think that's beautiful. And I think that's really what can get lost in the weeds when we hear people talk about hierarchy of neighbors, or a hierarchy of love. And truly, we are shown that there is no hierarchy. There is no limit or boundary or expectation that shrinks down, but it is to simply go out into the world, help those around. So I hope this was very beautiful. I love this passage. As I said, I'm Josue, and I hope you have a beautiful Lent.